Marco, welcome back to 10% True. Thanks for coming back. Appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, great to be back, Steve. Thanks for having me again.
So we spent an hour and 45 minutes or so talking about your F-111 time last time round, and I'll put a link in the description and one of those little links on the screen now. So if anybody's tuning in and they haven't watched that, go and watch that first, and then come back to this one. But I think it'd be fair to say then the next port of call for our conversation is to find out what you did after the F-111.
Yeah, well, immediately after, so this has been late 1992, mid 1992 to late 1992. They'd announced that Upper Heyford was closing, and so I didn't want to be there to see it. And we talked a little bit last time about the rivalries in the different squadrons, and so we knew that basically as things shut down, you might end up going to one of the other squadrons. And as a 79th Tiger, that wasn't going to happen if we could help it. So I went into my boss at the time and to the squadron commander and said, hey, I'm looking for another opportunity. And so looking at, the Strike Eagle RTU was chock-a-block because of the transitions that were going on. And so I said, hey, how about an AT-38 so I can kind of go hang out for a little while. Most of the folks who would watch this will know a little bit about an Alpha tour. And so you kind of needed one of those as a fighter pilot to at some point. And so Alpha was was a ALO lift, which was the AT-38, AETC, or a FAC tour. So you needed kind of one of those. So it's like, well, if I get it out of the way now, then I'll get back into a fighter after that. So I asked him if I could do that. He said, I don't see why not. We're going to be ramping down. So I left in December of '92 and went to Holloman to become an AT-38 instructor. So I did that for several years. Actually, I closed another place down. Holloman ended up closing about 11 months after, or the AT-38 program, not the base, but the AT-38 program closed down at Holloman and relocated in '93. And so October of 1993, I ended up moving with the AT-38 to Shepherd Air Force Base. And so to set up a program there, so it was a brand new AT-38 operation, which was starting up then. So kind of that backdrop of that's weird was the Air Force was changing while I was in Europe, and they'd gotten rid of TAC and SAC and combined that into ACC, Air Combat Command. And then moved all of the training, even fighter training, into Training Command, which they renamed Air Education and Training Command. So all the fighter RTUs and everything were now Training Command units. So going into the AT-38 at Holloman was a TAC squadron. And then when we moved with that whole change, we became a flying training squadron, even though we were a fighter squadron still. But we were I moved over to Shepherd and we became the 88th Flying Training Squadron and did AT-38 operations there, which was a great location because of INJEPT. So all the guys that were there were going fighters. What part of the transition for that program was moving it to the AETC bases where the T-38s were, was supposed to limit the TDYs for the students too, so they could just walk across the hall and go to the AT-38 unit. That was co-located at their pilot training base. But that really didn't work out because they never put one at Vance Air Force Base. And so kids were still going TUI, so we'd still get some folks from other bases. But anyway, we were doing AT-38s, and I did that until 95. So
just going right back to the beginning of that then. So LIFT is lead-in fighter training. Which is nowadays called IFF, Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals.
Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. Yep, and that changed while I was there. That was kind of one of the changes for AETC was to make the name change. So yeah, IFF was a name change, very little change in the way it worked, almost none.
What about for you then? So I've got sort of two questions really. What is the AT-38? And as an F-111 guy then, coming to lift, what did you have to learn or relearn?
Yeah, that's a good question. The AT-38 is a modified basic T-38, so same two seats, same basic airframe. It had a few modifications, including a gun sight. So you had a piece of glass up there with a camera, so you could record your heads-up display. Again, it didn't have any information except a reticle, bomb reticle, and you could change the mils, so you could adjust the picker for mils, but not left and right. No lead computing, just a hard sight. And then it had a centerline pylon. It was capable of carrying a Su-20 bomb rack or actually a gun pod, 7.62 millimeter 5-barrel Gatling gun pod, Su-11. And so we actually flew those at Holloman. When we moved to ATC, strafe was kind of over, so we didn't do it anymore. But at Holloman, we still strafed, which was really fun. And then you could put a bigger travel pod on it than a regular T-30. You could put a full up-sized travel pod. I always wondered why they didn't plumb it for gas, but they didn't, so you couldn't put a fuel tank on it. But other than that, it could carry pretty much anything. It was a normal MAL rack. So that was the big differences. The other difference, it had a little bit of a strengthened empennage for, they knew we would over-G them a lot, which we did. Other than that, the engines were the same. The rest of it was the same, but it was painted camouflage blue to be a little more tactical, I guess. The good thing about it is for a kid coming out of pilot training, and really the reason for it was get a kid coming out of pilot training, and rather than send him straight to an F-16 or an F-15, you give him an airplane that he's familiar with flying, and then teach him how to fly it a lot differently and work the tactics. So they would learn basic tactical formation much more than they did in pilot training, and also BFM and surface tech, and then some low-level tactics too. So basically, you got the standard fighter pilot building blocks in the AT-38 that prepares you to go to RTU and then do it in a jet that costs a lot more money.
Did you focus then, because you were you'd come from that surface attack side of things? Did you focus on that part of the syllabus? No,
matter of fact, it was interesting. So we had pilots, obviously, from all the different MWSs coming in as instructors, and so we'd all go through the same thing. But for me, because I was a 11 guy, I didn't really have any BFM except for when I was a student in the AT-38. It was my last BFM flight. I had a couple extra rides to get ready to get more proficient. So you had a little bit of a proficiency phase in the iPub program to get qualified in the front seat in all the missions, and then you'd move to the back seat to start teaching it. And so because I was a surface tech guy in general, I really didn't do a whole lot of that in the syllabus. I think I got 2 or 3 rides because they're like, well, you obviously know how to do that. And it was real heavy BFM, so offensive, defensive, and high aspect BFM. We did a little DC BFM, dissimilar with F4s that were there at Holloman, and then F-16s or F-15s if they were around. So we'd get a little bit of that, but mostly just similar in the AT-38 against AT-38. But yeah, so it concentrated on that. And then as you started teaching the syllabus was really actually kind of heavy BFM. So I probably taught more BFM than surface attack or low level over the course of my AT-38 time, which is why I guess when I ended up getting the F-15C, I thought, well, I should be able to know how to do that. And that turned out to be a little different than I expected.
Before we get to that, because that's going to be an exciting conversation for me because I'm a bit sad. Not so much for you, but before we get to that, so I interviewed Haka Haskin, he's an ex F-15E guy, was an instructor at IFF, and he talks a lot about how IFF wasn't really about taking somebody and getting them ready to go and fly the Eagle or the Viper as a BFM machine. It was about sort of culture, instilling practices. What is it like to be? What should you be as a wingman? The pilot training pipeline is about sort of the administrative side of things, formation, flying in the weather, that kind of stuff.
Right.
What outside of the cockpit then, what were you doing to sort of instill that sort of fighter pilot mentality into your students?
Well, and he's exactly right. That was a big part of it, making sure you could turn a pedestrian, or actually not pedestrian, they knew how to fly, but a training command guy into a fighter pilot. So it was the epitome of the fighter pilot location. So, you were in the bar every Friday night. You pushed it up with the students. You made sure they showed up, and learned that side of it. I learned how to, my potty mouth was probably 10 times worse when I was an AT-38 instructor than any other time in my career. Back then, I chewed Copenhagen pretty regularly, and that was something that you did in the briefing room, and we had spittoons in the briefing room.
So this is chewing tobacco.
Oh yeah, chewing tobacco. So yeah, that part of it, that hard charging lifestyle was a big piece of IFF and lift. And then it went straight into the cockpit too. I remember, almost every first sortie in the AT-38, the kid jumps in the front seat and starts running the checklist. And, all the IPs, we would just sit there and not say anything. So there was all these challenge and response items in the T-38 checklist. Hey, I'm all strapped in. How about you? And we wouldn't say anything. And then they'd go, sir, did you hear me? And we wouldn't say anything. Finally, you'd go like, shut up. And they'd say, did you hear me? I go, did you just hear me say shut up? And they're like, yeah. And I go, okay, yeah, I heard you. I go, don't talk to me. You're training to be a single seat fighter pilot. Nobody's going to talk to you. Get your crap done. When you're done, let's go. So there was a lot of that in the transition from a training guy to a fighter guy. And it was all really to develop that culture, that killer instinct. Interestingly, we could talk about it just a little bit, though, is the women came into the fighters when I was at Holloman. So we had the first female fighter pilots show up at Holloman, and I was in the 7th Fighter Squadron there. And so that was one thing that we were trying to figure out, how do we continue to do that with women, or can we do it the same way? And largely we did. I was really kind of proud of the Air Force for not totally turning that over. So we basically they said, hey, clear the porn out of the briefing rooms, and other than that, don't change anything.
How did the women respond then?
Pretty good, actually. I mean, the first one was that Jeannie Flynn, which she was pretty famous, I guess, at the time. And
she went on to B-52s, didn't she?
No, she went to the Strike Eagle.
Oh, yeah. Yes, she was a general. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and so here's what I liked about her is, she was a second lieutenant. She could have really kind of taken the limelight and tried to really play it up, and she didn't. She did her interview because the Air Force made her, and then she said, hey, I'd really like to be left alone so I can do my training. And she flew a decent jet, so she was good. We had a few other ones coming through at the time. What the Air Force had done was they picked Jeannie because she was a regular pipeline person, straight out of pilot training. And then they went back and said, well, for the last couple of years, there's women who would have got a fighter if they would have been allowed to. So they pulled them back into training. And so some of them were in other MWSs, heavies, or they were vapes, and they brought them in. So they had experience. And most of those were, again, they had a lot of flying on them. So they did fine. At the end of the day, I mean, the truth was a woman could fly the airplane. That wasn't really a problem. But some of the cultural parts were a little different. And one of the things I starkly remember is debriefing in a defensive BFM sortie with a female, and she was kind of laughing about getting killed. I'm showing her the film, and I'm like, here you are getting tracked. And she kind of laughed, and I yelled at her and said, this isn't funny. You're freaking dead. And she kind of looked back for a second. But with the guys, I guess, playing Army when you're a kid and all that kind of stuff, when you said, hey, you're dead, they kind of took it seriously. And initially we kind of had to help the women understand it was serious and it wasn't play. And that wasn't, a general rule, but it was, onesie twosies that I saw. But again, they were great. They did the job. They flew the jet. They went to the squadrons in there. Been a good asset to everywhere they've gone, as far as I know. We talked.
We're going off on a tangent. Although I suppose technically I haven't got an agenda, so other than talk about the Eagle, so nothing is a tangent. It's relevant. But we talked a little bit before we hit record about culture. What's your observation then of the direction, the vector that the Air Force's culture was taking as you progressed your way through the Air Force and eventually separated?
Yeah. While I was still in the jet, I think it was pretty intact. I didn't see those kind of things that are kind of going on now until after I was kind of out as a on the staff as a colonel, and then I was not in the fighter squadrons, but I had friends that still were. I had a good buddy who was the OPSO of the 10 heads at Langley. And he would just gripe all the time because they'd have a party or something, and most of the young guys wouldn't show up. And they go, "Hey, where were you?" And they're like, "I had to do something with my wife." You're like, "What?" That's not how it works. Or they wouldn't be around, on Friday night at roll call, or they wouldn't be around after fly, and they just leave. It was kind of switching to a job more than a lifestyle. So that again was something that I tangentially watched over other people's experience. But while I was still in the jet, through my Eagle time, it never ended. And it could have been partially that when I was at Mountain Home, it was still the early '90s, mid '90s, and when I was at Kadena, we were overseas. So I think overseas, it took a lot longer for that to change. But at the stateside units. In the 2000s is when I was hearing those kind of stories about culture change and just, my buddy would go, "Yeah, we got the new age fighter pilots. They're just not the same."
It is an interesting question, isn't it? One sort of my friends described it as the Air Force wanting warrior monks. They want people who can go out and kill other people, but they don't then want those people to party and use profanity or, do any of the stuff that pilots maybe used to. But
yeah, and I think the killer was less what the Air Force was doing, and really it was political correctness. I wrote a paper when I was at SOS as a captain, Squadron Officer School, about how the PC culture was going to make it so we couldn't actually kill anybody, which that would be a problem. When your job is to kill people and break things, but you're not allowed to do it, then we don't need it anymore. So I think it was the PC culture coming into the military, and of course, that's still ongoing.
But why does it matter? I mean, let's say if you take the extreme, which is the officers' club, strippers at the bar, that's the old sort of adage of things like in the post Vietnam era fighter pilot world. That's what happened. Why is that important? Why should that be preserved, or things like that?
Well, I don't know that necessarily need to keep that part. That was I don't know that the original fighter pilots, if you go back to looking at Rickenbacker and the guys, I don't know that they had that. But they were push-it-up guys. They drank, they smoked, they probably used foul language. But the mentality of being a warrior isn't PC, and so I think the womanizing part, and we saw that with Tailhook. The big problems with Tailhook, that may have been a cyclic or a time period that maybe wasn't as bright for everybody as it could have been. But you don't have to have that to have a killer instinct or a killer attitude. I think look at Rock Hudson or something like that, and you can go, okay, well, you can be tough and still have like a life. You don't have to go to a strip club every day. Matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I had a rule with my wife that I wouldn't go to strip clubs unless I asked for permission, because like if it was we were TDY and they're like, "Hey, we're going to the strip club," I'd go, "Hold on, I got to call my wife." And I would call her and say, "Hey, Lisa, the guys are going to strip club. Is that cool with you tonight?" And she's like, "Yeah, don't stay there very long." But I think that that I'm still married. Been married for 32 years, so that's probably part of it.
That is a really good sort of a question, isn't it? Around then what it's like for the spouse and the family of somebody serving in that environment. There was, I think, a Navy study which looked at divorce rates, and they looked at the psychology behind the relationship, and I think they came away and said that one of the things about females is that they need to get their emotions. They like to share their emotions, and they need to say something like 15,000 words a day or something like that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things about fighter pilots is they don't want to talk about emotions and that kind of thing.
Right.
So he comes home from work and she wants to talk and he doesn't. And so this is of course disregarding any of the other stuff,
Yeah.
sort of infidelity or anything like that. But
Right.
is it tricky for spouses? Do you think the political correct culture has made things easier? Does it have a bearing?
I think it does, and I think it hasn't been positive for the spouses. As a matter of fact, my wife was well integrated, and the wives were both when I was at in the 79th at Hayford, when I was at Mountain Home. The wives groups would get together. They were at our parties. They didn't shy away. I think the PC culture has made it where, and I think this is one of the reasons that you see the guys themselves not being there as much. Is their wives don't want to come. They're going to go do something else. They're going to go do their own thing. So I think the family being in the squadron changed the culture also. We used to have spouse days at the squadron all the time. They'd come in, we'd do taxi or wives taxi day, all that kind of stuff. And so they were around. They were providing stuff. When you were deployed, they were helping each other out. So I think it was more of a family, even though we pushed it up hard and we did stupid stuff. I think the wives were part of it in the past. And I think that part is not as maybe connected as it used to be. I know that was starting to go away when I was a squadron commander. And, again, that was in the T6 later. But we had wives that just didn't want to participate. And we'd never seen that before. In fighter squadrons, they didn't really get a choice to participate or not. They were just in.
It does. It sort of. I find it just as an outsider looking in, remarkable some of the stuff that the spouses have to put up with, and at the risk of anybody thinking this has turned into some kind of amateur psychology from 10th century. We'll move on. To back to flying in a minute. But
yeah,
there are a couple of things that stand out to me. The first is that given that a lot of what frontline guys are doing is secret. They can't talk about it. If you look at Hacker as a good example, he told me after the fact that when he deployed to Iraqi Freedom in March 2003, well, they deployed before, but that's when it kicked off. He wasn't allowed to tell his wife where he was going. Right. Although, interestingly enough, he said the phone number was unclassified, so he shared that, and you could just look up the dialing code and tell you where they were going. But they do have to put up with an awful lot of uncertainty, and then again, that doesn't even then include knowing whether or not you're going to come home at the end of the day.
That's true.
So do you think that that sort of disconnection then between maybe sort of the spouses and the Air Force that maybe was happening, does that make that kind of thing more difficult to deal with, or is it better?
I think it's harder because they don't have the network established when you go. So like I said, when we deployed, the wives were hanging out together. So maybe they didn't know everything, but they didn't know everything together, and they had friends, and they were all in the same boat. So I think that the people that we saw that did have problems, the spouses that did have problems during deployments, were ones who weren't as engaged or didn't try to be. So anyway, I think that has changed and makes it a little harder.
Let's talk about flying.
All right.
10 minutes talking about emotions. Too much. So how did you find that lift tour then, and at what point did you find out you were going to go to the Eagle?
Yeah, I loved it. We flew a ton. I flew on average probably about 7 times a week. So usually double turn, and it'd be one in the back, one in the front. So a lot of direct support time, a lot of solo time, and a lot of BFM and dropping bombs on the range. So it was a blast. And again, the culture was there, and we had a bunch of guys from different MWSs hanging out. So I loved it. How did I end up going to the Eagle? Well, as I said, my calculus when I went there was I could hang out to get into a Strike Eagle, and so that probably would have worked. But about that time, I think it was about 95, the F-15E RTUs shut down to relocate to. Now Seymour, yeah. So it was at Luke, and they decided to move it. So when I needed to leave, and I'd already been there kind of a little bit longer than I should have been at Shepherd, and but I couldn't get it. There just wasn't any slots. So my OG said, "Hey, I got a C model. Would you be interested in that?" And I hadn't even considered that as a future possibility for an old F-111 guy. But I said, "Heck yeah, that'd be cool. When can I go?" And he goes, "Well, it's soon." So I found out, and next thing you know, I was headed to Tyndall to F-15 RTU.
So you said it a couple of times now. MWS is major weapon system, so that's just
right.
the Air Force's way of saying an airframe, a particular airframe. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How did you? I mean, was that intimidating then?
A little bit. I mean, again, we had, in the AT-38, we had several F-15C guys. So when I found out I was going there, we actually did a DACT deployment, dissimilar combat training deployment, down to Luke Air Force Base to support the F-16s. So we were doing a bunch of DACT, and we did some of that at Shepherd too, with the Tulsa Air Guard guys and the F-16. But I got checked out in ACT and ACM, spinning up for that, and I worked with just the F-15 guys that were spinning me up as a flight lead for ACM and ACT. So I was really stressing a lot of the BFM stuff, and I was flying a lot with the C model guys to kind of get my stuff together. And what was most intimidating, as I thought was going to be the hardest part, was I'd never actually had a radar before. Never worked a radar, never worked a HUD, never really did intercepts on BVR targets, beyond visual range targets. And so I thought that was the part I was going to really probably struggle with. But I thought, I've been flying BFM for 3.5 years, been teaching it, probably got 500 hours of BFM now. So I thought I should be able to handle that part. And so that kind of gave me, I think, a false sense of security going into F-15 RTU, because AT-38 BFM's not fourth generation BFM. So I learned that pretty quick.
What are the differences then? What can you say about that?
Power, G's, G available, nose rate, a lot of things that are different. Turn circle management, energy management. It's very different. The AT-38, basically for defense, you go into your brake turn, select full afterburner. You could muscle memory the jet. You just roll here, boom, 6 Gs, and you just hold it, because the other jet doesn't have any more than that either. And it takes it to get all the way to the floor, basically, to do high-low yo-yos and get onto the turn circle. And then you do your floor transition, and it's over. So it was pretty predictable and pretty canned. So it was more like, to be honest, an F4. We used to do a little bit of dissimilar with the F4, and the F4 and the AT-38 were about the same. So once you graduate, to an aircraft that has greater than 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, has a very capable radar, has off-bore sight missile capability, a gun that's canted up, so the picture when he's gunning you is different than pure pursuit. It just looks a little different. That was a thing I had to get used to, is what does it look like when he's gunning me. So those were the big things. And one of the biggest things right off the bat was the F-15 is huge compared to an AT-38. So you had to get comfortable kind of saddling up close to a much bigger aircraft. My first couple of stories, I was taking really long shots. So I'm like, that thing's huge. I can't make it get as big as it needs to be to get it in tight. So those were some of my initial things that made it a lot different.
There's loads of questions I've got on that, so I'll just try and work through them in some sort of logical order then. So I think probably a lot of people listening to this will be flight sim enthusiasts, will probably have flown something like DCS and the F-15 that's in that simulation, and they'll have some sense that an intercept or some BFM is not that tricky. You do some HOTAS and then some symbology appears and you do your thing. And I'm really lucky because in my previous life as a writer and a photographer, I got to fly the Eagle in BFM and DACT, and I got to sit in on briefings. And it's pages and pages of stuff that you guys talk about before you even, so you do the motherhood stuff. That's how we're going to get out to the air and how we're going to get back. That's all briefed as standard.
Yeah.
And then everything else is just really, really intricate detail and so many line items. And so how did you go about learning all that stuff? Because there's a sort of part of me that thinks about stories I've heard about guys who were in operational jets, went to something else, went back to an operational jet and really, really struggled. And some of them didn't actually make it. Some of them ended up, with desk jobs.
Right.
What was the process? How'd you do it?
Again, I think again the AT-38 time, although I was probably overconfident in its transfer, I knew all the tools. I knew when they told me, hey, you're doing this, I knew exactly what they were saying. So I didn't have a problem with understanding. It was sight pictures and feel. And so I had to learn that, and it, I did okay in offensive BFM. It took a little bit. I think I got one extra offensive BFM ride in my RTU syllabus. Defensive was where I didn't do well, and I sucked pretty bad. I had to get a couple extra defensive BFM rides, and a lot of that was again that kind of sight picture, like understanding when I'm in a WES. Because, when you fly for 3.5 years and the bad guy only has a gun and what that sight picture looks like, and his missile is basically an AIM-9 Papa, so it's only tail aspect, and he has to basically be pretty close. Now you're working with somebody who has AIM-7s, AIM-9s, AIM-120s, and so all of those different WESs you have to defend against. And so that's a huge difference in sight picture looking over your shoulder. So offensively, it wasn't as hard. The weapon systems are great. There's a lot of great cues in the airplane, in the HUD. And so that part, I think I did okay. And pulling Gs, I didn't have any problem with Gs. But seeing the WESs on the defensive side was the biggest problem. And again, I knew what they were telling me. I wasn't untrainable because I understood, they're like, here's exactly what you're doing wrong. Look at the tape. And I'd go, I totally get it. It was taking that understanding from the debrief to the next flight and translating it backwards to making it, to seeing the right sight picture. And that took a little time, probably, more than it would have for some, but I got through it. And then once we got into the ACM, ACT, and actually the radar work, which I was really concerned that I would be able to learn that since I'd never done that, that actually came really pretty easily. And I really credit that with, we could use the simulator whenever we wanted. And so I went over every empty time period I had. I went to the sim and I played with the radar and I ran intercepts and I shot gazillions of weapons and everything I could. So I spent a ton of time in the sim learning the radar because I was concerned that I wasn't going to be very good at that. And when I transferred that into the jet, doing ACM, ACT, high aspect BFM, all of those things where you're, coming from BVR or from further out, running the radar and running the HOTAS systems, the auto acquisition modes in the radar, all of that really came pretty easy, and I excelled in those areas, which I thought that was going to be the hard part. So I was happy with that, and I loved it. And the other part that I thought was going to be hard was being by yourself. I think, having my 111 time, I always had a Wizzo, but I'd flown. I think I had 400 hours of solo time in the T-38 teaching, and so flying by myself wasn't kind of what I was worried about. It was, can I employ the jet by myself? Am I going to be good enough to run all the systems without another dude. And the airplane is just so amazingly set up that it just, you don't need it. You don't need another guy. Everything is in your hands and available. And so I think that the designers, I tip my hat to the designers of the Eagle, because they got it right. And it just was, I may have mentioned I was a human factors engineer major at the academy. And so every time I get into an airplane, I'm always thinking about how is this right? And it was right. So it was very comfortable for me. And I think that helped a lot.
You mentioned HOTAS then, so that hands-on throttle and stick, which is the combination of sort of buttons and switches that you can toggle with your fingers without taking your hands off the stick and throttles. But I think someone once said to me, an Eagle guy once said to me, it takes about 350 hours or so, probably about that to get comfortable with it. Was that your experience?
No, I guess not. I mean, I would say probably for me 100 hours. Maybe if you were an Eagle baby, where that you was your first experience, then maybe because I had 1,500 hours of fighter time when I got to the Eagle. So yeah, it wasn't the same, but I was pretty comfortable with it when I left Tyndall. I mean, I obviously wasn't great. I was a nugget, a nugget wingman, but I felt comfortable in it. I knew what I was doing. But when we got to Mountain Home, it was actually a different jet to some extent. We had a lot of different systems in the C models at Mountain Home, because we had the brand new ones with JTIDs, and we had 220 motors, and we had APG-70 radar. So it was mech'd a little different, but it wasn't so much that it felt different. And the JTIDs, I think, operationally, coming into the jet with JTIDs really enhanced your SA so much that it complemented the stuff you're doing with everything else, with your HOTAS and your weapon systems. And I don't know that I would say I was, God's gift to it in 100 hours, but I was in combat in 100 hours. And so I felt pretty comfortable.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second then. So, okay, so
Yeah.
So JTIDS is the Joint Tactical Information Display System. So it's like a moving map, and other aircraft in your flight can send you their position.
Yeah.
It all appears on. Okay, all right.
Full data link system and sharing system. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the process then of working the radar? Again, I mean, for many people, their only experience will be looking at a sim like DCS, which does a pretty good job, I think, of showing you the symbology, but not necessarily a great job of showing you the experience. How difficult is it? What are the stages of an intercept? And what are the sorts of things you have to think about? I mean, do you just watch a little blip come down the screen and then when it tells you, you shoot it? Is it that simple?
No, not exactly. But it's in layman's terms, it's not that far off. I mean, so yes, I think some of the most important parts of running the Eagle radar and making sure you knew what you're doing is being in the right modes and scopes. So that was you could screw that up. If you're in the wrong scope, you're never going to see anybody, so you could be normally we'd be in an 80-mile scope, and you'd start painting targets somewhere out 60, 50 miles or so. You just roll your cursor up there and you can do some sampling. And so the radar was smart enough that you just roll it over it and it could tell you some information, aspect, altitude, airspeed. So you didn't need to lock them up right away. And often we didn't, because if you lock people up, they know they're spiked and they might start reacting. But yeah, then you're going to put them in a certain spot on the scope. If you want to do a single side offset intercept, you put them in over on one side and you track them down through the range and you keep sampling them and you watch what they're doing. And basically you track them across the scope to where you want. If you're just going to engage BVR, part of that is IDing them. So the Eagle did have some capabilities to do some non-cooperative target recognition capabilities. So I could do modes and codes and find out, are they somebody I can kill? Or, if you had a hostile declaration from AWACS or another aircraft on that target where you want to shoot at them, then that's a little different than just an intercept. If I'm going to pop them, then I'm going to shoot the weapon. I'm going to crank to to slow down and intercept for him, make sure that he can't intercept me while my missile's en route. And then depending on what type of weapon I'm firing, if I need to stay with the target or if I can drop him and do something else. And then there's also, track while scan. So you could look around for other people while that's happening, sample other targets inside a Twiz. And so there was a lot going on in there. But it was essentially, you tracked him down the scope in the way you wanted him to flow, and turned and then pulled him into the HUD, see him, and then you could, do a visual ID. You could shoot him with a heater, saddle up for guns, whatever you needed to do.
So two questions then. The Eagle has a visual intercept mode, and sort of allied to that question, which isn't a question, that was a statement, but did you use it was the question. But allied to that was, it's noticeable when you talk to F4 guys, you had to have a guy in the back working the radar because there was some maths happening in that person's head, sort of aspect, rate of closure, heading angle off, all those things. So if they wanted to do a visual intercept or they wanted to convert behind somebody, that would have to be happening. And it's interesting reading, some of the experiences of RAF Lightning pilots, how that was sometimes the reason that guys didn't succeed was not because they weren't great hands, but because they couldn't do the arithmetic in their head and turn an intercept into a successful one. So were you, this is a really long question, but were you using the visual intercept mode? Did you have to do things like mental maths while you were running the intercept?
Sometimes and not really. Yes, I mean, you're doing some, but really it's more of a, the way I did it, I mean, I guess there could be different techniques, but the way I did it, it's a relationship down the scope through the intercept, right? So I would watch, you tracked it in a certain way that as the mileage clicks down, and if he's just a straight and level target, you're intercepting a bomber, you just need to do a stern conversion and end up a mile behind him, which we actually practiced, and that was probably one of the hardest things to do. But once you get proficient at it, that's how you find the tanker, right? I mean, that's exactly how we go to the tanker. So there's really not that much math. There's more of a moving the target along the radar scope in the way that you want it to move. So you put it, 30 degrees over and you drop it down and then you bring it to the cata intercept, bring it to the nose and pull it around. And by the time you're moving that way, you've got them in the HUD, right? So once you're starting the final part of the intercept, you have them in the TD box, he's in the HUD, you can see him. So I don't think it was that mental calculation issues that I ever had to really deal with. It was more relational to how he moves on the scope. That I would use geometry rather than calculations, I guess.
Okay. Related to that, then, and I'm making an assumption, so tell me if I'm wrong, but as an F-111 guy, your target's static, it's somewhere, it's a thing, it's probably not well, it might be moving, but probably isn't. You've got probably only one target, maybe a reserve target, whatever, but now you're going up against maybe 4, 8, 12 adversaries, and they're all moving around. How difficult is it to fly the aeroplane, work the systems, and build a mental picture, and perform your duties as a wingman or a flight lead?
Yeah. Again, I think that for me, having a lot of flying time helped with that, because and even maybe the AT-38 was helping that because it was so dang small and it was painted blue. So keeping track of another AT-38 in tactical or doing high aspect BFM against them, I mean, you didn't have a radar, but man, you had to know where they were, and you were always kind of making sure you do a lot of station keeping. So that part I didn't really think was all that difficult. Building the mental picture, when you get into guerrilla type packages, like large force packages, was way easier with JTIS because now everybody's lock is in my scope too. So as soon as everybody starts sorting, I can see who's got who. And when I look at that picture versus what I'm seeing on my radar, you could really tell that, hey, we've got everybody sorted. And so it was less worrisome. Without JTIDs, it's tougher. And so when I went to Kadena later, and again, this is going to be a couple of years later, we didn't have JTIDs, so I had to kind of revert back to that non-data link aircraft. But I was also kind of went back to wingman status for most of that time because I was a guest help. And it really wasn't, I don't remember having any trouble even with large package ops, kind of knowing where everybody was. I mean, there's a lot of it that's you're getting off comm, right? So you got to listen to the calls. You got to extrapolate from the calls where that person's going to be. You got to know where your good guys are. And then when the merge happens, if it's a big furball, it can get dicey. I didn't really have, I think, problems in the BVR world. It's really when you get into a 8-10 ship furball in the merge, that's when it gets crazy. And you do lose track of people, and you're doing belly checks and making sure you're not going to run into somebody. And that's when, at times you're like, I'm getting the hell away from this for a second, and I'll pitch back in with more SA because right now I'm dangerous. I'm just likely just to run into somebody. So yeah, that part could get a little crazy. But I think in the BVR range, it wasn't. I didn't have as much trouble kind of building that mental picture. And kind of being able to sort out where everybody was.
Clouseau's book, so he's a friend of yours, and that's how we ended up sort of talking to each other. But I've read his book; it's a great book. Everyone should go out and buy it. But
yeah, I'm waiting for it to show up. I ordered.
You are okay.
Got here yet.
I won't spoil it, but he does talk a little bit about his experiences at Kadena as a young guy and losing sight of his flight lead. And it's noticeable if you read World War II accounts, things like Battle of Britain. Guys will talk about how they merged with 60 Me-109s or something, and then the next minute they can't see anything. There's no one. They're just flying along happy and fat and dumb, I think you guys say, and they can't see anybody to shoot at, and they're not being attacked. Did that happen a lot? I mean, do the speeds that are involved mean that that's more likely to happen, disregarding technology and things like JTIDs?
Getting separated happens, yeah. But I don't remember, I don't remember too many times that I was in a furball and didn't know where anybody was, or ended up in that situation where like, hey, all of a sudden I don't know where anybody is. I will say that I've jumped out of a furball just to get, and it wasn't not what we do. I mean, if you're like anchored and you can't get anywhere, blow out of it and then pitch back in from a different direction with SA, with everything out in front of you. That's a good thing to do. Now, when you do that, figuring out which one of those swirling masses is good guys and which one's your wingman before you shoot somebody is where you have to resort it out, because you do lose SA. If you have to pop out of that furball and then reassess coming back in, and there's a lot of comm happening there. Hey, I've got two in a left-hand turn at 10,000 feet. Are you in front or back? And he's like, I'm offensive. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not going to shoot the guy in the back then. And so and again, the Eagle was helpful with that. With modes and codes, I could get a good guy, IFF squawk. So if I put my cursors over that guy, or if I auto acquisition lock him up and I get a good guy designation, you're going to drop that guy immediately, because I don't want to have him on there anymore. And then you work towards the next guy. So yeah, there is times when you have to rebuild that SA because of the way the engagement's happening. But the Eagle had good things that helped you do that. And then the comm we used, I think, was really important in developing that. And of course, those kind of comms have been developed over a lot of different wars with a lot of different fighter pilots. So I wasn't, I didn't make that stuff up. I just had the luxury of learning from other people who did it for a long time before I did.
I have heard it said that with situational awareness with SA, the first person to lose it is the last person to realize.
Yeah.
Are there sort of stages of losing SA, or does it just hit you like a ton of bricks that you don't really know what's going on?
I think there's stages. I think there's times you think you know what's going on and you don't, and that can happen. And again, I don't think that. I think that's the worst place to be, is thinking you have SA, but it's all wrong. If you know you're clueless, that's actually a good thing, because you're going to look for more information to fix it. If you think you know what's going on and you are totally wrong with your how you perceive the world, you could be dangerous to everybody else. So I think that's true. I think that there are stages of it, and getting it back does require you to realize you don't have it. So you can kind of flush. Okay, I thought this was what's going on, but that's not. So I'm flushing that entire concept, and I'm going to rebuild the picture in my head or in the cockpit so that I get it back. And I mean, I obviously can remember times of those things happening, and those start with, getting on the radio and going like, okay, hey, are you headed north? And finding out, no, I'm headed south. And you're like, crap, I don't know who I'm with then. And so, those kind of things. And again, JTIDS was really helpful for that. I mean, and I know we'll get probably into it, but man, with JTIDS, you could fly at night like day tactics. It was that game changer-ish.
Before we do that, we will get on to that. I'm just going to go back to emotions again, just for a minute. Well, psychology really, but it was interesting. You mentioned, sort of 15 or 20 minutes ago, about one of the big changes you had in going to the Eagle was that it's a bigger airplane, so you were having to get closer to it than maybe you were comfortable with. And I also noticed that you had just said that you flush out because you were uncomfortable being in that sort of swirling dogfight. And it just recalled to mind, Doug Dildy Disco, who's an Eagle guy I wrote the Eagle Engage book with, and other products as well, actually, other books. He told me about a time once when he was the squadron commander at Schusterberg, and they landed. And one of the guys just walked up to him with a sort of ashen face and said, "I can't do it anymore. It's scaring the shit out of me." Does that resonate with you? Is that, how frightening is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can understand the sentiment. I mean, I wouldn't say I was definitely scared a couple of times. I mean, probably the closest call I ever had and the most scared I ever was in an airplane was when I was an AT-38 instructor, and we were doing high aspect BFM setup with a new student. And so for their first one, I basically just do a turn in, and I'm just a duck, just a platform for him to work a lead turn exercise on. And so I'm watching him, and he's coming kind of right at me, and I can tell, like, this guy needs to bunt. He's gonna be really close. And I'm watching him, kind of waiting for the IP and the other jet to take it, and it's just getting bigger, and he is not moving in the cockpit. And so finally, and I was solo. Finally, I just pushed. About -2 G push, and I heard him go over my melon. It was just, his jet's engine's just right over the top of my head. And so that scared the crap out of me. And that was the F word came out on the radio on that one. And we had to knock it off. And what I found out later was when you're exactly pure pursuit in the AT-38, the student's melon was basically right there. You'd have to bend around to see, because if he was directly pure pursuit, you can't see. And that was what was happening. The IP was going, "Hey, do you got him? Do you got him?" And the student was like, "Yep," but he wasn't maneuvering his airplane the right way, and he would have hit me if I didn't move. So I was still at Holloman there, so that was kind of early in my AT-38 time. But yeah, we dang near had a midair. In the F-15, I had some close ones, but we had good ROE. The no pure pursuit head-on missile attacks inside of 9,000 feet. That's a good rule. And so I think guys were pretty good at doing that ROE. Obviously in combat, That isn't going to work, and you gotta do what you got to do. So I couldn't. There's no way I could say I never caught down from a flight really sweaty and a little bit like, man, that was a crazy one. But I never wanted to quit. I loved it. It was awesome. I mean, even when you're scared, it was great. I don't remember ever coming down thinking like, even when it was dicey, like I don't want to do that again. It was always can we go again? Can I go now? So yeah, I do understand the sentiment. I never had one of my guys do that, but I understand it.
Let's talk then about you getting to Mountain Home. You obviously graduated the B course at Tyndall.
Yep.
What determined where you went, and did you have a preference?
I knew where I was going. I had the assignment to Mountain Home before I went to Tyndall. So yeah, because I was in actually a B course, it was a TX, so it was a TDY. It was a short course. You
did the TX?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had more than 1,000 hours of fighter time. So even though it wasn't similar, it was a TX. It was a Track 2 TX, which is for experienced fighter pilots who haven't flown the F-15 before. A couple of different TX tracks. So mine, like for example, I mean, I only flew the jet twice before I soloed. I had 2 hours in it for my first ride in a C model, which was cool. But because it was a TX Track 2, we got a little more. It wasn't B course level, but it was more than the I'm coming back to fly the Eagle again class. So I knew I was going to Mountain Home before it started. It was kind of funny. One of the things I remember, Pete Stavros was my flight commander. I was in the 1st Fighter Squadron at Tyndall. And he's like, oh, man, you're so lucky going to Mountain Home. Those guys, it was a composite wing, and we could talk about that because that was pretty unique. But he's like, yeah, those guys, all they do is go to red flag. It's a blast. They never deploy. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that sounds like fun. But that ended up not being true. But yeah, I knew I was going to Mountain Home, and I was excited about it because I'd flown the F-111 at Mountain Home. And so we were kind of going back to a similar place that we'd been. I was familiar with the locations, familiar with the airspace. We liked Idaho. So it was good. We were, my wife and I were happy about it. Although we did kind of lament that every other Eagle base seemed to be at the beach. But the Mountain Home was definitely not the beach. But my wife was from Colorado, so she liked the mountains, and it was a good location for us.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so just picking up on that composite wing thing. So that's the 366th fighter wing,
right.
If I remember right, and so that's some S-16, some F-15Es, some F-15Cs. Did you have some Marine prowlers as well?
We had some prowlers. Yeah, we had. They were actually not located with us, but they were part of the composite wing. They actually flew out of Whidbey Island, but we would work them into packages and train with them. So they'd come over, So they were technically assigned to the 366, but they didn't live at Mountain Home. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, and the idea is, from an Air Force point of view, I think they ditched it in the end, didn't they? But the idea was the whole wing would deploy to a combat theatre, and then all the pieces you'd need would be together and used to working together.
Right, and one of the reasons I was happy to go there and I was excited about it is that's what we did during Desert Storm in Incirlik, and we talked about that a little bit. But we had a composite wing at Incirlik that was, they've done it in the past in World War II, and they've done some other combat operations out of composite wings. So when we did it during Desert Storm, it wasn't completely unique, but it was really good. And so we had everybody in the same place. We all trained together for those, the build up, and then we were able to employ together. So yes, what they did was they basically took that concept that we did during Desert Storm and said, we're going to build these AEFs. So it wasn't going to be a composite wing. It was going to be this new concept of building air expeditionary forces. And so Mountain Home was kind of a test of that. And can we afford, or does it work if we build a bunch of little composite wings all over the place? And what they found out with Mountain Home is, yes, it's extremely effective, but it costs way too much money and we don't have enough assets to sprinkle them and make a bunch of composite wings that are actually combat effective, because you don't have enough F-15s, you don't have enough F-16s to put the right mixtures at multiple places. So yeah, but we also had our own tankers. We had KC-135 Squadron at Mountain Home, and we had B-1s. We had the 34th Bomb Squadron, so we had 6 B-1s. So that group was hugely effective. We had 18 C models, 18 E models, 18 CJs, 6 B-1s. I think we had 7 tankers, and then we had the prowlers. I don't remember how many specifically we had, but when we deployed, they would attach with us. And so you had everything you needed, and in kind of the right amounts. So it worked great. And we had these different deployment packages. Basically, it was based on fighter size. So you deploy 6, 12, or 18 of each fighter type, or you could mix them if you wanted a lot of strikers. You could take more Strike Eagles. If you needed more CJs, you take more CJs. So it was very flexible in concept, but it was super expensive. And then some of the things they did to try to make it work better was, and that's why we had it on home, our C models had 220 engines. So we were common. All the fighters had 220s. So the Viper guys hated it because the CJs had GEs, usually, and now they're kind of detuned to these Pratt 220s. And the Strike Eagles, it was the same engine as the Strike Eagle at the time. So we loved it, though. The C models were like, man, we got these big motors, and that helped because then every fighter had the same engine. And then we also had the APG-70 radar, which was common with the Strike Eagle instead of the APG-63, which most of the F-15 squadrons had the APG-63. Again, it was pretty mech'd pretty much the same in the sea, but it had a ground mapping capability, obviously, because the Strike Eagle needed that. And because I was an 111 guy, I used to play with the ground mapping on it every once in a while.
Did you have to keep that secret from your squadron mates?
Yeah, I didn't talk. Actually, I talked about it once when we were deploying to Saudi. I turned it on over the Med, and I'm like mapping out the Nile, and I was telling guys, hey man, if you go to this and do this, you can see the Nile. It's really cool. I don't think anybody else did, but anyway, yeah. So we had that, which was a little different.
Was that because there is for anybody who knows anything about the Eagle, they'll know that sort of infamous expression, "No, not a pound for air to ground," from the SPO, the Special Programs Office for the Eagle. But what was there that kind of mentality? As an F-111 guy, were you ribbed for your background?
Not really, because I think I could have been, but because I had combat experience, I actually got, when I was at Tyndall, it started, I actually requested special dispensation to be allowed to say the word bomb, because of course that was not allowed. And it was granted because I dropped them in combat, right? So they're like, okay, well, you're allowed to say it, but nobody else is. And then at Mountain Home, because we had the Strike Eagle guys, and they were, right over next door, actually, and our 2 squadron buildings were next to each other. And because I had a lot of 111 guys that ended up in the Strike Eagle, I had a lot of friends that were over in the Bull Tigers, the 391st. As a matter of fact, I had been in the Bull Tigers in the F-111. So I was allowed to go to their squadron without being chastised and kind of talk about it in the squadron. So actually, I think it was somewhat of an asset because, yes, culturally we felt like that, but we also had to work with those guys on a day-to-day basis. And having somebody who spoke air to ground a little bit and understand what they were asking for, I think was helpful. One of the things I thought, though, when I was at Mountain Home was that I thought they should figure out how to fly the Strike Eagle differently, because I felt like they flew it like a big F4 with way more capability, because basically the Wizzo in the back seat would still do a lot of the stuff with the radar that the pilot didn't need him to do it. And I saw them mess up intercepts where the Wizzo had one guy and the pilot was looking at somebody else and miss sorts because of that. And so I advocated that they basically use the two guys in separate roles, where the front seater is an air-to-air expert and the back seater is an air-to-ground expert, and then they both support each other depending on which role they're in at the time. And so my thing was, I told the strike group guys, man, as soon as you go to air, tell the Wizzo to shut his freaking mouth and look out the window, because the best thing he can do is see what's going on out there, and keep sight of everybody, and tell you if anybody's rolling in on you. But the radar was the same, so I didn't think, I wouldn't want the Wizzo, I wouldn't want anybody running my radar during intercept with the capabilities that the F-15 had. All you could do is get confused. And so I think that, I don't know how they're doing it now, but if they aren't doing that, I still think they should.
I think that with the ASA radar now, there's some kind of timeshare going on, isn't there? You can pretty much use it in an air-to-ground and an air-to-air role at the same time.
That's true.
And I think their fighter data link, I can't remember what it's called now, Situational Information Display, SID. I can't remember what it's called. I'm so out of touch with it, I don't know. But I think that's a timeshare thing as well. You know, you can have the guy in the back working the air-to-ground radar and have the SIT display in air-to-ground mode, and the guy in the front can be doing the air-to-air stuff. But
that'd be better.
I think it'd be interesting. I've got an F-15E guy who's ex-Wizzo who transferred to the front seat of the Strike Eagle. He's coming on in a couple of weeks, so I'll ask him that question, see what he says.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
You do raise an interesting point. I did hear there's a forum I go to on the internet that has a lot of Air Force guys, and some not very complimentary comments from mostly obviously front seaters about the dynamic between pilot and Wizzo, and a handful of them have experienced both single seat and sort of crewed worlds. Did you sort of come out of having been an F-111 guy and an F-15 guy with a sort of definitive view on whether the Air Force should be pursuing aircraft that were single seat, whether or not the second person was necessary?
Yeah, I think it depends on the mission and the aircraft. So in the 111, it was necessary. In I think the F4, the way that the technology was at the time, it was probably necessary. In the F-15, it's not. Again, I used to say though that if you put another seat in there, you could put anybody in there, but I would turn it around so that all they did was look out the back, because that's your blind spot, right? I mean, all your sensors are forward. You're usually looking forward. I didn't need any help with that. But you never wanted anybody to sneak in from behind you. And if I had just an R2D2 or anything that was looking backwards all the time and just goes, hey, somebody's behind you, that would be worth its weight in the seat. But I didn't need them for anything else. Now I think it's different in the air to ground mission, especially if you're flying low. Now that you have smart weapons and we're not really flying low anymore, the opportunity to hit the rocks while you're down in the scope is not as great. So maybe we don't need it anymore. But I can say that in the 90s when we were flying low level, sometimes it took all the pilot stuff to fly the airplane, and you still needed to have somebody doing the weapons in the air to ground role. So I think that role, it's necessary. But in air to air, no. But I mean, how many single mission aircraft do we have left? I mean, we really don't. So.
It certainly looks like with the F-35, with sort of automation, sensor fusion, that kind of thing. Single seat is a realistic proposition. Although interestingly, they've got now Loyal Wingman, which is this drone program.
Yeah.
That, ironically enough, suggests that you do want somebody in the backseat controlling the Loyal Wingman, the drones.
Yeah.
But whether or not AI is advanced enough to allow them to really sort of be effective, who knows? But so going back then to the JTID's APG-70, better motors on those Eagles. Is it is it sort of accurate to assume that if you had JTIDs, everybody in the composite wing was contributing to that, or was it just the Eagle guys?
No, nobody else had it. Just the C models. So no. But when you were like in combat operations or even in exercises, AWACS had it, and then or GCI, different GCI units could get into the net. When you worked with the Navy, if you were near a carrier, they were in the net. Some other, I actually at Red Flag, I flew with a British Tornado unit that their air version, the Tornado, they had JTIDs, and we worked actually the very first international integration of JTIDs at Red Flag when I was there in, I think it was 98. And so no, I couldn't see where they all were unless AWACS was tagging them and pushing that data to us, and then I could see it. But you didn't really need that. What I needed more was engagement data and where we were, where our C models were, and that was all in there. So I didn't need to know where all the friendlies were because presumably they're behind me because we were always out front, right? I mean, so that was the cool thing about flying the F-15 is you're always the first one in. So you'd sweep or set up whatever you were doing for OCA, and anybody in front of you when you came in is not going to be friendly because there's nobody in front of you, right? So until you're there and start setting up your cap, and then you obviously could have people all over the place. But initially, you're always the first one in. You sweep up into the lane or into the area, and then start your cap, and then you could sample people. So as you're turning back around, if I wanted to check them, and again, you can do that with interrogating IFFs. So I didn't need necessarily TIDs to see them for that. Could do that with IFF.
Did that system make you lazy? You said that when you went to Kadena, they didn't have it, so you had to learn how to fly without it.
Not really learn how to fly without it. Just, I mean, because sometimes you didn't have it, sometimes it didn't work. So it was. I would say it was very good at enhancing your SA, but we never treated it like it was perfect. So. I mean, there was cool things in it. Like when you deployed, when we went to Saudi the first time, we were on our way over there and we had 3 cells of 6. We took 18 Eagles over to Saudi, and you could bump out on scope for hundreds of miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles. And you could then pick somebody like other formations that were in JTIDs that were, 300 miles away, and then just drill down and come into their formation, and you could see where everybody was. And you're like, oh, that's kind of fun. Or if there was, like I said, a carrier in the net, I could drill over on him, pretty much almost anywhere in the world he is. If I know which direction, I could roll out to him and find him. So there was a lot of capability in there. But it wasn't the end all be all. And, you still had to kind of know what was going on. It just helped a lot. And it helped a lot at night or when things were getting a little crazy, because then we could still basically fly wall at night with JTIDs because you could see it under scope. We're all lined up. Once everybody started turning, then you had to kind of go back to those regular station keeping procedures to make sure you weren't doing anything to the wrong guy. But it just gave you a lot more SA.
So can you just talk a little about then the flying that you did at Mountain Home, and then maybe we can talk about Southern Watch, which I'm guessing is what you did if you went to Dhahran. I'm assuming it's Dhahran, but we
went to PSAB.
PSAB, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So were you always flying as a composite wing? I mean, would you Eagle guys go out and just do your own thing, or would you always have to be flying with someone else?
No, we trained ourselves a lot for all the BFM, and not all of it. We actually did dissimilar BFM a lot too, but we made sure we were good, and then we would do a lot of dissimilar though. So most Eagle units, they want to do dissimilar because it's better than just fighting against yourself all the time. So having dissimilar assets at your base, we could do it almost anytime we wanted. So that was good. But there was times when you're upgrading people or you're training where you don't want, the Viper guys being red air and they don't do what you ask them to. So you're really trying to show a specific thing to your wingmen. You can brief, your other Eagle guys, and they know exactly what you need. But the Viper guys might go, they don't really need that. Let's give them, the exploding cantaloupe. You're like, well, dude, that wasn't what I'm trying to teach this kid, something, and you totally cornholed it. So we did that. We did a similar training a lot when we were doing building blocks and stuff like that. But then we do what we call, I think we called it Mountain Home Force Employment or something like that. We had a name for it, but we do these big composite packages, and we'd go over to like Navy Fallon, or we'd go down to, we would go to Nellis a lot, because we had our own tankers. So we'd take off, hit our own tankers, go down to the Nellis ranges and do some stuff down there, and then just come home. So not even land at Nellis, but large force stuff down to Nellis and back. Or on the Utah Test and Training Range, which was basically the other part of the entire state of Utah. You could fly in, and we would go there a lot. So there was a lot of different opportunities for us, both similar and dissimilar. And then we would go down to Hill a lot too. They weren't very far away from Mount Home, down to Hill Air Force Base, which had a giant F-16 wing. And we would fight with them a lot of large package work with them trying to do air-to-air and air-to-ground, and come down there and either do red air for them or do blue against large package ops down at Hill. So there was a lot of different things we were doing. For me, at first I was a wingman, so I was learning. But I got there in November. I was MR in January, I think. And then we actually deployed in March. So it wasn't long. I'd only been there for about 4 months when we deployed to PSAB. And that was a composite deployment. We had 18 C models. And this was crazy. I don't know if you know who Gork Gorence is. He ended up being a 4-star, but Gork was our squadron commander at the time. And so for an 18 PAA squadron, you have 20 tails, 18 PAA primary aircraft authorized. That was our max strength, but we had 20 actual airplanes on the ramp. And this is one of the things that's negative of a composite wing is if I need to take all 18 and I only have 20 and 1 or 2 of them are broke, I mean, it's very, very tight, and you can't borrow from the other squadron because nobody else has F-15Cs. So you got to figure that out. And so when we had to take 20 airplanes to Saudi, 18 airplanes to Saudi, we needed air spares and ground spares too. So we were launching all 18 at the same time to head over, and we actually had all 20 of our airplanes, every single tail in the squadron in the air. On that night when we took off, and we ended up taking the primary 18, the 2 air spares returned. And so that was pretty majorly impressive. And we landed at Lodge's Field there in the Azores, halfway, spent about 30 hours on the ground there, and then flew the rest of the way to Saudi. And again, 18 up and 18 on the ground into PSAB. So that's the first time I've ever seen that. And they all made it. Nothing major, no major issues, ready to turn to combat operations in 12 hours. So extremely impressive for our maintenance folks and the squadron to get that kind of performance out of the jets. But anyway, yeah, we got over there in March, and it was AEF-5, it was called. So we were in the development of the Air Expeditionary Force. And so we were there for Southern Watch with all of us. We had, I think, 12 Strike Eagles and 12 CJs. We didn't take the bones we had some of our tankers there. But we were mostly doing all the Southern Watch missions, U-2 support, lane defense, escort, long duration vols, just covering Southern Watch missions.
Was it so just for anyone listening? So PSAB is Prince Sultan Air Base.
Prince Sultan Air Base, yeah.
So, obviously in Saudi Arabia, and so Southern Watch was the southern no-fly zone to stop Saddam Hussein's Air Force from flying. I think helicopters were allowed. Was that right?
Depended on.
Depended. Okay.
Yeah, somewhat.
But principally, you were there to make sure he wasn't going around. I think there were some. I want to say there were some tribal people in the south. I think that he was keen to attack, and Saudi was in the south, and so was Kuwait as well. So there were a bunch of reasons for it. But what was it boring?
It wasn't very. There wasn't much going on. So at times it was boring. There was a couple of exciting missions, but they didn't really have to do with the threat. They had to do with other things that happened. The biggest thing we were worried about, again, and it had to do a lot with supporting the U-2. We had a lot of data intelligence collection going on, and the U-2 was up there quite a bit. So we do a lot of U-2 support. And so obviously we're worried about a high fast flyer. Obviously they had the Foxbat. And so if it jumped up and made a high Mach run at a U-2, he just has a hard time getting away. And so doing one of those intercepts on a high fast flyer, somebody over Mach 2, that's a challenging intercept to get out in front of them and get the weapons in the right place. And so I was up there with number 2 with Divot Nicholson one time. And we had just fenced in and crossed into Iraq, and all of a sudden I get a contact that's north of the 33rd parallel, which was basically the line they weren't supposed to fly south. And it was looking like that kind of profile. I rolled my bars up there, and I'm like, well, this dude's going pretty fast, and he's up at like 35,000. So I'm watching him and, call him out. Hey, contact, whatever it was. 18065, 35,000 Mach 1. So we're looking at it, and he keeps trucking down the scope. And so we're calling AWACS. They're like, we don't see anything. Divot's looking with his radar. He's like, I don't see anything. And so I locked it up, do a sample lock, and it's a hard lock. It's a dude's going fast, do the IFF check, no modes and codes. So, he's not squawking friendly. I'm like, dude, what is this guy? And so he looks like a Foxbat. He looks like a Foxbat profile. And he's on my scope for about 10 minutes. We're working an intercept and seeing him, but Divot never sees him. AWACS doesn't see him. And you may have heard of this before, but it ends up it's a gem lock, a gem line lock, a jet engine modulation lock, which is kind of a weird technical thing where a wave can come off of a jet engine actually forward out of the intakes and cause a ripple that the radar actually can pick up and see. And that's what it was. But it was a gorgeous lock. It was a beautiful, it just went away after, about 10 minutes. We went back in afterwards and looked at the film, and everybody's going, dude, that I've never seen one last that long. I've never seen one that stayed like that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. It looked real, but there was nothing there. So, things like that happened. But really they weren't doing anything at the time. This was 97, March of 97. So it was pretty quiet north of the border. We'd see them every once in a while flying up there and watch them and sample them but I never had anybody come south during that deployment. So it was mostly flying caps and doing long bowls and getting gas a lot, and then going back to PSAD. We did do some CT though, which I guess was different. We were continuation training. We were doing, every couple of days we just go fly a 2v2 or a 4v4 out in the training airspace, and just to keep our kind of, the edge and work the radar and practice weapons employment because we weren't shooting anybody up north.
That's a really interesting point, flying those CT sorties. How would you describe the sort of atrophy or the rate at which you lose the edge as you describe it? How often do you need to fly in order to still be good?
Yeah, I think the minimum wrap wasn't really enough. I think you got to fly a couple times a week minimum, and that needs to include pulling G's. Because for me, the first thing that I got weak on was, you go up after you hadn't flown for a couple of weeks and you do your G awareness turn and almost black out, just because your body needs to re-cage that process again. And then, after a couple of turns, you're fine, and your body's like, oh yeah, I remember what to do here and how to do your L1 straining maneuver and all that. But your resting G tolerance falls off quick. So you need to do that enough that that you're ready. And then a couple of times a week, I think, is enough to keep you proficient and capable. For the young guys, maybe 3. And sometimes we didn't get that much, which was kind of bad. But
how old were you in 1997? Approximately.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, 66. So what was I, 30? I guess.
Okay.
31.
I didn't ask that just to embarrass you.
No, I was like, no, that's math in public. Yeah, 31.
I was going to say we could edit it out, but I won't.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
The reason I was asking was, again, you just sort of hear anecdotally that flying fighters is a young man's game, and I remember. I can't remember exactly who it was about, but there was somebody, he was a Navy pilot who could kill anybody within 90 seconds or whatever. And the counter to that was, if you were a young guy, you'd just go up there and pull lots and lots of G's and he would tire out. Is there some semblance of truth to that? Is it a young man's game or young woman's game?
Yeah, well, I think so. The pulling G's is that gets to be something that you don't want to do. But I think with experience and with cunning comes the ability to kind of do it without pulling as many G's. So you learn how, and I saw that even in my limited experience with young guys. When I upgraded really fast when we got back from that deployment, I was made a flight commander. So it only, very quickly I was a flight commander, and I wasn't even a 2 ship at the time. So my squadron commander's like, well, we need to get you through, 4 flug, and you need to be a mission commander since you're already a flight commander. We need you to move that through. And so I upgraded really quick. And because I was a supervisor, I could do a lot of upgrades that didn't require an IP. So I'd fly with a lot of young guys. And I saw that, they're just banging on the stick and pulling G's, and I'm like, wait till they unload, because now they're out of energy, and just gun them. And then come back and show them the tape and go, see, here's where you were pulling like 9 G's. And I look at mine, and I'm like pulling 3. But I'm slow, you just know how that geometry is going to work out. And so I think there is a with maturity, I think you don't necessarily always need to pull a million G's. Now on the defensive side, G's are important, but offensively, you can probably do a lot that doesn't need to always be at the limiter. Just maneuvering the jet and preserving and working energy.
Why are G's important for defensive?
To create angle problems, right? I mean, so that's the you're trying to move the WES away from your jet all the time, and so generating that turn rate to change the aspect of your jet with relation to the other guy is really important. And so it's not necessarily G's, but it is rate. It's turn rate that's important. So that's why I think in defensive you're going to do a brake turn, and the brake turn is largely to get you down below corner or close to corner so that you can really turn the nose. Because at higher airspeeds, you might be pulling a lot of G's, but you're not generating a lot of turn with respect to nose authority. So yeah, I mean, at 500 knots, I can be at the G limit, right? And my turn circle is huge, but below corner, below 320 or so, I can generate extremely fast nose rate, but I'm going to lose energy when I'm doing it. So it's a trade-off. It's that all air to air is a trade-off. It's an energy game. Do I need energy or do I need turn? And you play that game the whole time between rate and radius of your turn. That's the whole game. And on defense, it's important to make it happen quickly, make that change happen quickly. Because really, what in defense, you're surviving to go offensive. That's the whole goal. Defense is a temporary problem to go offensive as fast as you can. So that's how I always thought of it. Anyways, I don't want to be defensive. I want to be offensive. So let's change it as fast as possible.
All these things you mentioned ages ago in this interview, going from the 8038 to the F-15, and energy management, turn rate management, turn circle management, all these different things, being able to assess what the other guy's energy state's like. Does there come a point where all these things, and you just mentioned L1, just the straining maneuver, where all these things just happen and you almost have an out-of-body experience where you're not thinking about them anymore? Or is there always a component of you consciously assessing what's going on?
I think you're always assessing. I think some of it becomes automated in muscle memory. But yeah, you can't ever kind of take it for granted, because as soon as you do, they're going to do something you didn't expect, right? So being unpredictable. We always talk about that. I always thought it was funny on Top Gun where, Ice comes into Maverick and he's like, I don't like you because you're dangerous. You're unpredictable. And I'm like, exactly. You don't want to be predictable. Predictable's, you die if you are predictable. So there's things that I know the other guy's going to do that are predictable. But the reason he does them is to change the calculus of the engagement. And as long as you're changing the calculus of the engagement, there's always something else you have to do, right? So BFM is about solving problems. You're just continuously solving a problem. And so the way that becomes, I guess, to both how fast can you analyze the changes to the problem and then do something that is advantageous to you, is the thing, right? So they talk about the OODA loop, I guess. That was one of those things that came out a while ago. And it's that orient, decide.
Observe, orient, decide, act.
Yeah, there you go. That the faster you can do that, the faster that happens. And that's, I think, the same guy, isn't it? 90-second Boyd.
Yeah, Boyd. Yeah,
yeah, that's the guy that came up with it.
That's who it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, conceptually, that's it, right? So you have to be able to do that faster than the other guy, and then make the right decisions too, and then maneuver your aircraft. There is a problem with, I know I want to put it there, and can I put it there? Because do I have the right energy state? Do I have enough power? And so there's things that I might want to do that I can't do because of my energy state, and so I have to do something else. And those kind of things become feel. And the F-15 talked to you really well. So you could it had an aerodynamic feel. It had beeps at different G levels that talk to you. The weapon systems, again, are great. So, your auto acquisition modes are out there. You get shoot lights that tell you, hey, you got somebody in a WES with the weapon that you've selected. So there's a lot of data that's coming in that enhances all of those things. And you don't have to be looking inside at your instruments to do that. So I think that's it. It is, yes. I guess the short answer to your question is yes. It's feel somewhat becomes automated, but you're never out of the decision orient, decide, act loop. You're always doing that.
So speaking of that, then, speaking of Boyd, and EM diagrams and that kind of thing. Obviously, you're doing a lot of your dissimilars against F-16s, F-18s, maybe Strike Eagles, because they are slightly different, Harriers, that kind of stuff. How do you build a picture in your mind then of what a flanker can do, or what a Fulcrum could do, or any other kind of adversary aircraft? And how is it important that you know that, so that if you did ever find yourself BFMing a Fulcrum, you would have the right understanding as to what visual cues there are around energy state. So, are the little louvers open on the, on the index, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Um, the truth is, in the C model, if I had to do that, I might not have done my job right in the first place, right? So, I mean, the real goal was not to get into the turning fight, and one of the reasons the airplane was built the way it was and had so many great systems is so I could BVR kill people, and so really that wouldn't have to happen, but we always knew it did, and you had to be proficient at the BFM thing if you're going to survive the BFM thing. And then you could, I'm sure you've talked to guys who've been there. Rico talked about Rodriguez when he was basically BFM in a MiG, right? And he didn't necessarily expect to be there. But I think that's why it was important to do a lot of different airplanes, because then you could know, like, for example, I liked BFM and Hornets because they were a lot like we thought. They matched up in the EM diagram a lot to like a flank or a MiG-29. So, they had the MiG-29 actually had more power, but their nose array ability was like a lot like a Hornet. And so Hornet was way different than an Eagle when you're fighting them, because they just didn't have much power, but they had really good nose authority. They could turn. So having the ability, I guess, to fly against a lot of different airplanes gives you the ability to assess a lot of different airplanes quicker. And then, of course, we had some of those red systems to go play against and actually get that practice. So that was an asset too. Not as much as we would like and not as often, but you got an opportunity to fly against some of those out there in the real world. Especially like when you're deployed over to the Middle East, there's always somebody that's flying something that you've never flown against. So I did a lot of DACT and some BFM against Mirage 2000s, and then a lot of different Hornets from different countries. The F-16s and the F-15s, yeah, they're pretty standard. We're used to them, but when you got to go against somebody else, I did some DACT against F-14s out there when we were. This is my second deployment to Bahrain with the Wild Wars. We were at Sheikh Isa for a while, and we did an internal link exercise while we were there too, on top of all our combat flying. And that we actually worked with the Bahrainis, and they had F5s and F-16s, and then also there was 2 carriers in the Gulf at the time, so we flew a bunch of F-18s and F-14 dissimilar. And so again, just more airplanes, and you get to experience it and see the different ways they move. So yeah, you're right. I don't know how you get it unless you do it. But the more you did, the more you, I guess, respected and kind of were able to pick it up quicker. Because I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but as soon as they make the first turn, I can say, oh, that's a lot like this one, and I know how to do it against that guy.
Did you have in your mind then sort of a library of moves? If you see this, you're going to do that, or is it much more dynamic than that?
I think it's more dynamic than that. I mean, there was obviously some set first moves, right? So when you do canned BFM at 6,000, 3,000, 6,000, and 9,000 foot setups, there's a first move, offensive. Really, it's based on what the defender does, right? So if I'm the offender, I don't have a first move necessarily, because if he doesn't do anything, I'll just shoot him, right? I don't need a move if he doesn't do anything. So he's got to create a problem. And as soon as he starts to create a problem, then I have to figure out what's the solution to that problem. And so I think that's kind of how you see it offensively. And again, if I do my job right, that's where I'm always going to end up being. If I'm defensive, then yeah, your first move is turning your tail, get it away from his nose. So that's important. And then after that, I got to see what he does. Everything's a reaction to the next maneuver. So yeah, you can't kind of do, here's my first 3 moves. You can't, because your second move depends on his first. So.
Did you believe, as a community then, obviously you didn't train as a community for being able to kill everything BVR. But did you believe as a community that it would be BVR? I mean, when you say if I had to BFM somebody, i.e., I were close to them and we were manoeuvring in relation to each other and at close range, I'd have made a mistake. I wouldn't have done my job properly. If you think about Vietnam.
Right.
ROE dictated by politicians. There was a BVR capability. Okay, the AIM-7 wasn't great. It didn't work that well, but in theory there was. But that was restricted by the ROE.
Right.
Rico Rodriguez's experience was just a pop-up threat.
Right.
That happened, so that wasn't really because he hadn't done his job.
No, exactly.
So when you talk about that, is that just a mantra, or you, as an Eagle community, did you think actually we probably won't be able to kill all these people BVR. The numbers won't allow us to do everything BVR. The fact they'll have an electronic attack plan will probably mean we won't be able to do everything BVR. What did it really amount to in your minds as to what a sort of a symmetrical threat would look like?
Yes. No, you're right. That's a really good question. So yeah, I mean, I anticipated that we would get our a large amount of kills BVR. However, we always anticipated we'd be, overmatched, not in capability, but in numbers. And so even in the Korea threat, when you're over in Kadena and you're working the Korea threat, they're going to have very ancient aircraft that have the possibility of showing up behind you, right? So yeah, there's always that, and ROE restriction, or yeah, you're not allowed to shoot them unless you get a VID. But I guess when I say that, I'm talking about full scale, right? So if you're in the big one, I guess, you're not going to be doing that. You can't do that. So when it's ROE restricted, when it's limited, when you're in a place where there's tons of different assets and potentially even low tech assets, then yeah, that's something that you need to be ready for. And I would say the community wasn't not ready for that. I mean, that we trained that way every day, right? So we always took the BVR shots, and especially if we were working with externals, I could shoot everybody, and we still went to the merge. We didn't call all the kills because you don't get any training. If all I do is call all the kills from my AIM-120s. And like, okay, well then just reset, I guess, because we're not going to get anything else. But yeah, you wanted to get into it, and so sometimes you took them out. Like at Red Flag is a good example. At Red Flag, I didn't do too many merges because the goal wasn't training; it was war play. It was a war play. So if I shot everybody BVR because it was in the ROE, that was what we did, and that's what I did. I mean, I flew like 5 rides out there, and only during the day ride did we do any BFM, and it was because we wanted to. But every other Red Flag ride I had, all my shots were BVR, and I never merged. Not in a close visual fight. I mean, maybe you got in visual, but not into a turning fight. Shot them before we merged. But yeah, that's kind of what you want. And then once everybody's dead and they come back out in a training scenario, yeah, then they're in a different place, right? So that's when things change, and that might be kind of more realistic because you don't know where people are going to be coming from, and things just pop up like with Rodriguez there, where somebody just ends up in your formation you didn't know they were even around. That's when those skills need to be there, and that's why we practice them all the time. And that's why I said that BFM was something that you could lose good capability for, so you had to do that a lot. Just shooting BVR, and you could just take sims, right? You don't even really need to fly. You could just do it in the simulator and practice, and you'd be proficient. But it matters once you get closer, and you have to do that turning fight. And you always had to be ready for that. So yes, I say that I would rather kill everybody before they got there. And that was what we wanted to do. But we always were ready if that didn't happen.
I think, if you're agreeable, we'll do a third interview. You'll never get out of this. It'll just be you'll have to stop responding to my emails. But maybe what we could do, because we haven't talked about Kadena yet, and I'm really interested in hearing about that experience. I know you said that you were the sort of hired help, I think was your expression or something like that, but you were attached to the guys at Kadena. But I'm really interested in hearing about that, and I'm also really interested in hearing about your time as a T6 Squadron Commander.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I say that is because there's an ongoing conversation, in particular around some of the recent Class A mishaps. There was an F-16 and an F-15. I don't know if you read the reports. Both of those guys, young guys, maybe not well served by the Air Force's training system, perhaps. But it'd be interesting to get your perspective on that too. So would you agree to come back and talk to me again?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.